Ashir Qureshi noticed the woman's hands before he heard the sob. They were trembling on the conveyor belt, knuckles pale against a dozen small decisions: off-brand diapers, a half-gallon of milk, a box of generic cereal, a bundle of bananas gone more brown than yellow. Her eyes were red in the too bright grocery lights, and the cashier's smile was the careful kind people wear when the register is about to become a verdict. Ashir shifted his own basket: rice, lentils, 2 onions, a bottle of dish soap, feeling the coin roll in his pocket like a second heartbeat. He told himself to stare at the lottery ads instead. He told himself the store was cold because of the freezers and not because a familiar wind ran through him, the one that blew when numbers and needs didn't match. The woman's little boy squeezed a soft dinosaur with a missing eye, trying to be brave the way children try, with silence and big blinking. "Card declined," the cashier said, light as tissue paper. The woman's jaw moved once, like she was trying to bite a word before it left. She pressed her card again. Declined. Coin roll heartbeat. Ashir looked up at the display. $37.42. Not a mountain, not a molehill, but the exact slope between. He could feel the line growing behind him, the small impatience of people who had places to be and problems of their own. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Ashir swallowed. He didn't know why his throat hurt. He did know what it meant to do humiliating math in public. He knew the taste of asking the universe for another $10 and getting a lesson instead. "I've got it," he heard himself say. 3 words. He separated his coin roll with his thumb, the paper sleeve peeling like a dried leaf. The noise in the store shifted. He felt it in his shoulders, that turn toward a person who was just volunteered to be noticed. The woman turned slowly. A flush climbed out of her collar. No, I can—" "It's okay," Ashir said. He wasn't entirely sure it was. He tapped his phone to the reader, heart pounding at the thought of a declined beep answering a declined beep. His bank app had been a cliff for days. The terminal chirped approval. For a second, he was a bridge that held. The woman pressed both palms to her cheeks and then grabbed his wrist with the lightness people use to carry sparrows. "Thank you," she whispered, like a secret. The boy held up the dinosaur as if offering tribute. Ashir smiled at him. The cashier bagged in a different rhythm now, almost gentle. "Are you sure?" the cashier asked once, store policy soft. Ashir nodded. He could feel the coin roll gone thin in his pocket. "I'm sure." He didn't watch them leave. He didn't want thanks to become gravity. He laid his rice and onions on the belt like a person who would not just spend half a tank of gas on someone else's groceries. The cashier rang him up, and Ashir entered his PIN, and the machine made a happy little chime that felt like the smallest choir in the world. Outside, the evening had dropped a lid on the city. The grocery store's sliding doors exhaled him into a parking lot that smelled like rain on hot asphalt, the kind of smell that tells you the sky is practicing. He had 15 minutes to make the bus if he wanted his father's meditation to be refilled tonight. He had a mother who had learned how to catalog worry without letting it spill. He had a sister who believed she would be the first Qureshi to wear a university hoodie that wasn't from a thrift store. He didn't have a plan for next week's rent. A black sedan idled at the curb beyond the cart racks, glossy as an eyelid. The driver, a woman in a dark suit with her hair in a tight coil, watched Ashir over the top of a tablet. The rear window hummed down halfway. A man's voice came out effortless and warm. "You've got a minute?" Ashir felt his skin try on suspicion. An instinct older than the internet told him to keep moving, to make it to the bus stop and become another face with earbuds. He tightened his grip on the plastic bag handles until the onions pressed their round insistence into his fingers. But the voice had that polished edge he remembered from TED Talks and news clips on screens in electronics stores. Familiar, but far. He stepped closer, because curiosity is a kind of hope that pretends to be caution. The rear window lowered completely. The man inside was his billboard self, only softer. The gray at his temples not airbrushed out. The smile not aimed at a camera. Marshall Hale. Ashir's brain supplied the name a heartbeat before the rest of him caught up. Hale, as in Hail-Tech, as in the phone in Ashir's pocket and the billboard on Juniper Street with the clean white background and the promise of make light work. "I'm Marshall," the man said, as if strangers were not the ones who needed last names in this equation. "I saw what you did." Ashir could hear his own pulse in his ears. He also heard the bus's wheeze in the distance, the one that meant choices turned to schedules. It wasn't a big deal. He hated how small his voice made it sound. He didn't want to be auditioning for anything that required worthiness. The driver's eyes flicked toward Ashir's groceries and then to the bus stop down the street like she could hear the same wheeze. "We won't keep you long," she said. Her voice was precise in the way of people who are professionals at removing friction from other people's lives. Marshall gestured to the empty space on the seat beside him as if inviting a friend into a booth at a diner. "Come sit. If it feels weird, you can walk away. I promise." If it feels weird, Ashir almost laughed. Existing felt weird lately. He opened the door by instinct and by a certain kind of recklessness that poverty sometimes births, the kind that says yes because no hasn't been working. Inside, the sedan smelled faintly of new leather and something citrus. It smelled like decisions made in rooms with quiet carpets. Ashir sat on the edge of the seat, his bag of groceries between his shoes like an anchor he could pick up if he needed to run. Up close, Marshall's face had lines around the eyes that photographs skip. He looked like someone who had been told the truth enough times to prefer it. "You didn't hesitate," Marshall said. "Most people in that line were calculating." Ashir thought of the coin roll peeled open in his pocket. "I hesitated," he said. "I just didn't let it vote." Marshall smiled like he liked that. "Do you have a minute to come around the block? It'll be easier to talk without a parade forming." He glanced at the sliding doors where two teenagers had their phones half raised, hungrily waiting for something postable. The driver was already pulling smoothly away, not waiting for permission Ashir hadn't exactly given. "Is this where you recruit me to sell knives?" Ashir asked, because sarcasm is a rope you can toss yourself when the ground feels far. "This is where I say thank you," Marshall answered. He looked at Ashir in a way that made Ashir feel like the bus could stop existing for a second, "and where I ask if you'll let me help." The words were dangerous. Help came with hooks. Help wore shoes 2 sizes too big for you and then blamed you for tripping. The car rounded the corner into the quiet back lot where semi-trucks docked at night. Raindrops began insisting on the windshield, soft at first, then with more confidence. "I'm fine," Ashir said. Reflexively, an inside lie, but it sort of counted as one. "Okay," Marshall said, as if truth were a long road you could take your time walking. "What if I told you I can make 1 year of that road less steep? Rent, utilities, groceries, medical, paid. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe me a post. You don't even have to tell anyone." Ashir stared at him because sometimes disbelief is the only polite response. The driver watched him in the rear view without watching him. The world in the car got smaller and larger at the same time. Ashir felt a shape in his chest he hadn't let breathe in a while. Relief, testing the air like a creature that had been kept in a dark place. "Why?" Ashir asked. He heard the rawness in it and didn't sand it down. Marshall's eyes did a small, unguarded thing. "Because I used to be the little boy in that cart. And because generosity isn't generous if it waits for an audience." He shrugged, caught himself, corrected. "And because, selfishly, it reminds me who I wanted to be when all of this," he gestured vaguely toward a world that included billboards and headquarters and people whose job it was to drop you at curbs, "was a sketch and not a building." Ashir looked his bag of rice and onions. He thought of the bus timetable like a litany. He pictured his father's pills lined up in the orange bottle choir on the counter. He pictured his mother's hands, beautiful from carefulness. He pictured his sister, Mina, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Khan Academy paused on a math problem she was about to teach herself how to solve. He felt something old and stubborn in him, the part that insisted on standing alone until his knees shook, loosened by a hair. "What's the catch?" he asked, because love for his family taught him to interrogate miracles. "No catch," Marshall said, "but there is a boundary. I won't film you. I won't post you. My team will need some paperwork from your parents because, well, legal. But otherwise, you go back to your life and let me handle the boring parts. At the end of a year, you've had some breathing room. That's it."
Ashir sat with that. He let the silence be, because people like Marshall were used to filling it with confident sentences. The car ticked softly as the rain stitched the windshield. He didn't want to be bought. He didn't want his gratitude to turn into a leash. He wanted to sleep and not wake up counting. "My father doesn't like favors," Ashir said finally. "He likes receipts." "Perfect," Marshall answered, amused and tender at once. "Receipts are all I have." The driver's name, Ashir learned 2 minutes later, was Davina. She handed him a business card that felt heavier than it looked, like small objects sometimes do when they are dense with implication. The email address had "Hi at" in it. It made Ashir smile, despite himself. They didn't take him downtown. They didn't take him anywhere with columns. Davina pulled into a strip mall 2 blocks away, the kind with a nail salon and a laundromat that glowed neon at all hours. Marshall explained the logistics like he was outlining a recipe. "You'll talk to my COO's assistant," he said. "She'll set up bill pay to your landlord and your utility providers. We'll get your dad's pharmacy info. If there's something I'm missing, we'll catch it." "And if I say no?" Ashir asked. "You walk away with your rice and onions and a good story you don't have to tell," Marshall said. "And I go home with a reminder that people like you exist." He paused. "But I hope you say yes." Ashir nodded once, like an internal lever moving. "I'll talk to my parents." It was the kind of sentence that meant yes without the word. Marshall's relief was visible in a fractional exhale. He handed Ashir a folder, plain, manila, with 3 forms inside and a blue pen clipped neatly to the pocket. "Take your time. Call Davina when you're ready. We'll come to you." The bus would be gone by now. Another would come. The city breathed in loops. Ashir climbed out of the sedan with the folder under his arm and the bag of groceries swinging from his fingers. The air smelled like wet concrete and new possibility. He started toward the bus stop at a jog that felt like laughter, without sound. By the time he reached the apartment, his mother's slippers were already at the door. They were soft with years of floors. Mina looked up from the couch where her math problems lived and became all questions at once. His father was at the small kitchen table, shoulders squared against a world that had lifted and set down too many times on his back. Ashir laid the folder on the table and told them everything. He did not perform the story. He did not add music. He said the woman's card declined, and he paid, and a man in a black sedan said his name in a way that sounded like an introduction to a different year. He showed them the business card and the forms and the blue pen. His mother touched the folder with 2 fingers the way people touch artifacts. She asked, "Is it safe?" The question came from all the years she had turned herself into a shield. "It's clear," his father said after reading the forms twice. He had a gift for words that looked like they'd learned to stand up straight. No publicity, no obligations beyond verification. It's expensive kindness, but it's documented. He looked at Ashir, and something in his face cracked open enough to let pride show. "You would have done the same if you'd had $1 million, he said. "You did it without having 30. They signed. The pen was light in Ashir's hand. He called Davina. The quiet machine of someone else's competence started up around them. In an hour, a Hailtech courier with a polite smile and raincoat collected the forms like precious cargo. In 2 hours, an email pinged, confirmation numbers, bill pay accounts established, an ETA for the pharmacy transfer. In 3 hours, the landlord who had perfected the art of weaponizing friendliness texted a miniature novel heavy with exclamation points. Ashir slept for the first time in what felt like months. He dreamed of a world in which the future didn't always speak in interest rates. Morning was thinner and brighter. His father put on his best shirt, the one that had learned the map of his shoulders, and went to the clinic without the usual arithmetic of dread. Mina wrapped herself in her thrifted hoodie and solved 3 problems before breakfast because joy is sometimes exactly as simple as nobody interrupting you with fear. His mother hummed into the frying pan like her throat remembered songs that Jobs had tried to steal. Ashir went to school with a calm he wore like a new jacket. He wasn't rich, he wasn't safe, but the cliff had a railing. At lunch, his best friend Tavon asked why Ashir's eyes looked like 8 hours. Paid sleep, Asher said, and Tavan laughed a laugh that ended in concern. You good? Better than yesterday, Asher answered. It felt like cheating to tell the whole truth, and it felt like lying not to. He split the difference by being precise about nothing. News has its own weather. By last period, a whisper haze had drifted into the hallways, picking up names like a snowball picks up sticks. Someone had seen Asher get into a black sedan. Someone had heard that a man with hair like a magazine cover had called him a hero. Someone had decided Asher was either famous or in trouble, two categories people like to confuse. He kept his head down and his earbuds in. He let Khan Academy and lo-fi beats share the bus ride home with a new kind of thinking, the kind that plans beyond Friday. He got off 2 stops early to walk through the little park where the city forgot itself and became trees for 5 minutes. Cloud light made the pond look like a coin tilted in the palm of heaven. Near their building, he saw the sedan first and felt a pinch of worry before relief. Davina was leaning against the hood, checking her watch like time was a conversation she kept politely short. Beside her stood the woman from the grocery store, clutching the dinosaur with the missing eye. Asher's steps telescoped. She asked to find you, Davina said simply, stepping aside the way a stagehand steps out of a spotlight. The woman stepped forward and then stopped because gratitude is an awkward choreography. I'm Hannah, she said, voice not trembling now, just human. I wanted to say thank you when my son wasn't watching me fall apart. Asher smiled and said something forgettable that made room for the real thing of the moment to stand up. Hannah dug into her tote and produced a card she had clearly labored over, a folded piece of printer paper with a sticker and a drawing of the dinosaur in 3 different shades of green marker. My son thinks you saved his animal, she said. I think you saved my evening. Before Asher could answer, the building door opened and his mother, catching sight of the cluster of good intentions, wiped her hands on her apron and came out into the weak sunshine. She had the kind of smile that made strangers feel like neighbors for exactly 30 seconds. She greeted Davina with tea in her voice and then saw the dinosaur and understood everything else. Please come up. We have chai and biscuits that pretend to be from a bakery. Davina checked with the invisible schedule in her mind and then nodded. Hannah looked like someone who'd been offered a handhold on a steep path. The little apartment became more of itself by making room. An extra cup appeared, the sugar bowl grew generous. The dinosaur sat at the center of the table like a little green witness. When Marshall arrived 20 minutes later, he came with the kind of apology that people who manage too much use to walk gently. He took off his shoes at the door without being asked and looked at the family photos on the fridge with the attention of someone who knew how attention works. I brought something, he said, reaching into his coat and pulling out an envelope thick enough to mean it. He set it on the table, first month's rent, just so no system decides to be slow. He slid it forward with 2 fingers, like an offering that might spook if pushed too fast. Asher's father hesitated exactly as much as his dignity required, then nodded and let the envelope become a part of the room. Thank you, he said. His voice didn't wobble. It did something else, rose a half step like trust trying out its range.
Marshall looked at Asher. I'd like to do one more thing, he said, if you'll let me. He waited, and the waiting itself was a kind of respect. Tomorrow morning, we're doing a quiet rollout of a program I should have launched years ago. It's boring, corporate stuff. Internal funds directed to emergency family assistance, that kind of thing. I'd like to tell the team why it exists, without saying your name. I'd like you to be there, not on stage, just in the room, so I can look at the reason while I say the words. Asher felt the shy animal in his chest take 1 step forward. He looked at his parents. His mother's mouth did the little sideways curve it did when she was weighing community against caution. His father nodded once. Go, he said. Be invisible near the microphone. Ashir glanced at Davina. She gave the smallest of shrugs that meant, "We can ghost you if it feels wrong." "Okay," Ashir said, "but I'm wearing my own shoes." It was a ridiculous sentence, and everyone laughed, because sometimes humor is a permission slip. The next morning dawned like somebody had ironed it. Davina collected Ashir in a car that made lane changes feel like a violin slide. The Hailtech headquarters rose out of the city like glass had remembered how to be water and decided to stand up. Inside, security badges beeped obedience, and carpets swallowed footsteps. Ashir tried to make his shoulders smaller. He didn't go on stage. He stood in the back with Davina and watched 100 employees sit in rows of soft chairs with tablets on their laps, faces politely open. Marshall stepped up and did not do his usual charm. Instead, he did something slower and weightier. He talked about a little boy in a cart and a stranger who decided to close a small gap before it became a fracture. He talked about the difference between charity and infrastructure. He used the word duty once and let it hang. Ashir felt seen without being pointed at. It was a relief and a peculiar ache. He wondered if he would always feel both around this man. They were almost at the part where the applause would be the polite kind people give to initiatives, when the side door opened in a rush that did not belong to carpets and name tags. Hannah stepped into the auditorium with the dinosaur clutched under her arm, her face white-knuckled with urgency. 2 security guards moved toward her in a choreography that assumed threat. Davina's hand went to her earpiece. Marshall's voice faltered only on the inhale. Hannah's eyes found Ashir in the back of the room, as if the crowd were only a maze to be solved. She shook her head once, a small, terrified semaphore. "Ashir," she called. Not loud, but with the exact tone that cuts through rooms where important people talk. "Don't—" The dinosaur slipped from under her arm and hit the carpet soundlessly. The room's attention tilted toward her like a field of sunflowers following one cloud. A second figure stepped in behind her, the store manager from the grocery, face flushed with the righteousness of people who believe they are protecting rules. He pointed at Marshall with an accusing finger that trembled. He announced, "She's lying. This is a setup. That kid and that woman, they're running a con. I have footage. I have—" Ashir felt every pair of eyes in the room swivel toward the single story he had tried hard not to be. Davina's hand was already on her radio. Marshall's jaw set like he'd just been told a new kind of math. Hannah's mouth formed a word he couldn't hear from this distance, but felt in his bones. Ashir took one step forward, then another, the carpet swallowing the sound so completely he could hear the blood in his wrists. He opened his mouth to say the sentence that would either hold or drop everything. And the auditorium doors slammed shut behind him with a finality that sounded like a year about to change its mind.
This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Before Marshall could say anything, Hannah was trying to warn him, but the room had already rearranged itself around accusation. The store manager's voice ricocheted from the speakers like a rubber ball in a cathedral, each echo adding a layer of certainty to a claim that had arrived without evidence. Ashir's first instinct was the old one: go small, make less noise than a curtain. But something had changed in him since the grocery line, the knowledge that sometimes silence is a lie told to yourself. He stepped forward again, heartbeat loud enough to register as percussion. Davina moved with him, not touching him, just calibrating space so the security guard's readiness didn't become a different kind of threat. Marshall didn't rush the stage with denial.
He did what good leaders do when the room's temperature spikes. He lowered his voice. "We'll look at the footage," he said. Not to the manager, but to the room, and the room did what rooms do for authority. It waited to be told what waiting meant. Hannah clutched the dinosaur like it could anchor her to the version of the morning that had existed 5 minutes ago. "He's wrong," she said, breath trembling but words true. "I was there. He wasn't. He came out after. He doesn't like that someone helped without asking him first." The manager, Collins, according to his plastic badge when he turned, jabbed the mic again. "This boy and this woman ran it like a play. Card declines, hero kid steps up, then the guy in the black car swoops in. Viral bait." He looked at Marshall. "You think you're the only one who knows how narratives move product?" The audience leaned back, the corporate version of a flinch. Davina's radio ticked to life at her shoulder. She murmured something that sounded like coordinates. 2 staffers slipped out along the side wall, soft shoe urgent. Ashir found that the closer he got to the stage, the calmer he felt. "I paid because she needed food and I had a little," he said. No speech, no flourish. "If someone filmed it, it wasn't me." He glanced at Hannah, who nodded. "And I didn't know who he inclined his head toward Marshall, was until he rolled down a window." Collins smiled a small, satisfied smile that people wear when they think they've found the thread that will unravel a sweater. Convenient. Marshall stepped forward then, not to the front of the stage, but to the edge, as if refusing height on purpose. "Mr. Collins," he said, "you've made a serious allegation in a room where we're making a serious commitment. Please stay and help us examine the facts. Our security team is already pulling the store's public exterior feeds. Your interior footage is your property, and we'll need your company's permission for that. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you didn't accuse my guests of crimes in my house without evidence." The audience exhaled collectively. Collins's eyes flicked, calculating his own position now that someone had named the floor. "You'll be hearing from our legal," he said, which is what people say when their certainty needs time to gather friends. Hannah's knees wobbled. Ashir reached her. They stood side by side in the aisle, 2 ordinary people suddenly taller than their lives. Davina touched her earpiece. "Got something," she whispered to Marshall, who nodded almost invisibly. The side screens behind the stage woke up. Not the store's interior feed. Davina hadn't promised miracles. But the city's open street camera across from the grocery's entrance, time-stamped and indifferent. The footage showed a grainy rectangle of sidewalk, sliding doors breathing shoppers, and the black sedan idling where Ashir had first seen it. The angle was bad for faces and good for truths you can triangulate. They watched a young man leave the store with a single bag, more relief than swagger in his shoulders. They watched him hesitate with the caution of someone who has read too many cautionary tales. They watched a window lower, a brief exchange, the car drift to the loading area and then away. No pre-staging, no conspiratorial choreography, just a kid deciding quickly. It didn't prove everything. It didn't have to. It punctured the balloon of inevitability around Collins's accusation, and the room could breathe again. A murmur rose, the kind that sounds like relief checking its pockets for change. Collins's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "That proves nothing," he said, but softer now, like a man arguing with a recording. Hannah lifted the dinosaur. "I have something," she said, and her voice found a backbone it hadn't had at the door. She held up her phone. "You told me in the parking lot that if I came back with the groceries, you'd make it go away for a fee. You said the store couldn't have stories about charity making management look slow." Her thumb slid. Audio filled the room, muffled at first, then sharp enough to cut. Collins's recorded voice, unmistakable, wrapped in the sarcasm of a man who believes he edits the world. "You won't help, lady. You play by our rules. Bring the stuff back. We'll restock. You pay the restocking fee. And keep your mouth shut about the Good Samaritan. Nobody needs to know we can't manage our own lines." Silence, this time of the heavy variety, the kind that collects at the bottom of things. Davina didn't look triumphant. She looked tired in the way of people who spend their days catching lies before they turn into architecture. "Security will escort Mr. Collins to a holding area for a conversation," she said into her sleeve. And two guards, different posture, different training, moved in a way that was professional rather than punitive. Collins spluttered something about context, then remembered he was in a building where the air carried receipts. Marshall turned his microphone off. He stepped down from the stage and stood with Ashir and Hannah at human height. "I'm sorry," he told them both, and Ashir heard the kind of sorry that belongs to responsibility rather than guilt. He said, "We'll handle the noise. You handle your day." He looked at the room. "Break for 15. When we come back, we'll talk about the program that should have existed before this morning." Hannah sagged with the sudden exhaustion that comes after adrenaline forgets you. Ashir offered her a chair. She sat like someone who had earned sitting. He looked at the little green dinosaur staring up from her lap and felt a ridiculous swell of affection for its one good eye. "Thank you for coming," he said to her. "You didn't have to walk into—" He gestured at the architecture of scrutiny. "That." "She didn't come for him," she said, nodding toward the stage where Marshall was speaking quietly to a woman with a COO's posture. "I came for me. I don't like it when men with clipboards lie in my direction." Ashir laughed, and the laugh loosened something that had been locked since the sliding doors exhaled him the night before. He picked up the toy and made it nod solemnly at Hannah, then handed it back like a ceremonial act. When the meeting reconvened, Marshall didn't mention Collins. He didn't need to. He spoke about systems that either assume crisis is a surprise or build for it on purpose. He spoke about the difference between generosity and policy, how the former makes you feel good and the latter makes families sleep. He spoke for exactly 12 minutes and sat down. After, in a hallway that smelled like carpet glue and ambition, Davina cornered Ashir with the soft specificity of someone who has already scheduled your next two moves. "We can take you home, or to school, or to the clinic to catch your dad. Your call." "Home," Ashir said. Relief had a magnetic field today, and it pointed toward the couch where Mina solved the universe with a pencil. They rode down in an elevator that looked at itself in a mirror. Davina watched floors blink and asked questions that were really reassurances. "Do you need anything? Did this feel okay?" And accepted his no thank yous like answers rather than performance. When they reached the lobby, a reporter with a haircut like a promise materialized from behind a fern. "Marshall," she said brightly to the air, then recalibrated when she realized she had cornered the wrong constellation. "You're the kid, right? The checkout hero? Can I get—" "No," Davina said without heat, placing herself in that gentle, impenetrable way between the reporter and the boy. "Not today." She pointed the woman toward a PR contact with a smile so polite it could teach a class. Outside, the day had remembered itself. Buses sighed, pigeons managed their small empires, people carried coffee like torches. The sedan felt less like a spaceship and more like a car again. Ashir's phone buzzed. 2 texts from Tavan. "Bro, are you a superhero or a problem?" And then, "NVM, don't answer that. Proud of you either way." One from Mina in all caps. "You were on a screen at school? Also, bring chips." He smiled and typed back with the care of a person rearranging a small domestic universe back into its usual orbits. The rest of the week tried to return to usual with the desperate enthusiasm of a rubber band. It mostly succeeded. Bills that used to loiter like uninvited guests now queued neatly in autopay. The landlord, robbed of his favorite sport, discovered a version of professionalism. The pharmacy called to say the transfer had gone through. Ashir's father's medication would be ready for pickup with a copay of $0.00, a number that felt like a holiday. At school, the whisper weather changed direction twice. On Tuesday, a sophomore with a YouTube channel filmed Ashir eating a sandwich and titled it CEO Lunches with Local Hero as a joke, which traveled as jokes do without context. On Wednesday, a teacher in a threadbare blazer pulled Ashir aside and said quietly, "Good job," in the tone of a man who has spent his life trying to teach algebra and decency and only occasionally gets to see the latter on a projector. Marshall texted once, a photo of a whiteboard with the words Family Bridge Fund in block letters, and beneath them a list of bullet points that were not performatively practical, but actually practical. Direct payments to landlords and utilities, pharmacy partnerships, a 48-hour emergency pipeline for food stipends, and anonymous intake form accessible from battered phones. Ashir wrote back, "Looks like receipts," and Marshall sent a single checkmark. That weekend, Ashir took Mina to the park with a bag of chips. They sat on the hill and counted dogs like birds. Mina said, "Do you think we're different now?" Ashir thought about it. "I think we're the same people with fewer loud problems. That might be what different is." Sunday morning brought a new kind of weather. A thick envelope slid under our door at 7:12 a.m., the exact time city quiet is interrupted by birds that seem to have watched too many cartoons. The return address was a law firm with a name that sounded like furniture. Inside, a demand letter from Colin's employer, accusing Hannah of defamation and demanding a retraction. Screenshot of his audio file attached, as if the existence of her proof were the crime. Ashir's mother held the letter like it had a temperature. She said, "He wants her to be tired. He wants her to agree she didn't see what she saw." Ashir's father traced a sentence with his fingertip. "They are used to being the only ones with paper," he said. "He is betting on that." Ashir texted Davina a photo of the letter. Her reply arrived in 90 seconds. "Got it? Don't respond. We'll handle." Then 3 dots. "Would Hannah be okay with counsel? Pro bono. Real, not pretend." Hannah said yes, because saying no to kindness that comes with a lawyer's letterhead is a luxury few people possess. The next day, she sat in a small conference room with a lawyer whose earrings were modest and whose questions were weapons with velvet handles. By Thursday, the law firm that sounded like furniture had quietly retracted its demand and sent a note that used the phrase misunderstanding like a bandage. The world does not become fair in a week, but sometimes it becomes slightly less tilted, and you can feel your feet learning a new angle. Ashir felt that on Friday, when he stopped by the clinic to pick up his father's medication, and the pharmacist, who had always been kind within the constraints of systems, looked actually happy to see him. "We're piloting something with HailTech," she said, scanning labels. "You're the first one through. No hoops." She placed the bag on the counter with a small ceremony. "Tell your dad to take these with food." On the way home, Ashir cut through the grocery store because courage occasionally needs practice, and he wanted to see what the place felt like without the memory of panic. The sliding doors breathed him in. The fluorescence did its humming prayer. A new manager stood where Collins had stood, and the cashier's smiles felt less like policies and more like faces. At the end of aisle 4, a small sign had appeared near the customer service desk. Community line, no questions asked, up to $40. A HailTech logo in the corner, small enough to feel like a signature rather than a billboard. Ashir stood and looked at the sign for a moment like you look at a small, useful bridge someone finally installed. He bought bananas that were actually yellow and bread that did not apologize for its price. In line, a teenager behind him shifted from foot to foot, counting silently with a stack of coins. Ashir turned without drama. "I've got 2, he said, holding up a pair of dollars. The kid blushed, then grinned, then accepted, and the universe did its little echo trick. That night, Marshall called from a number Ashir had not expected to ever have. "I'm not going to make a habit of this," he said, and Ashir heard the smile. "But I wanted to ask you something without email. We're building out the intake portal. Would you look at it? Tell us if it's usable for a person who doesn't have a laptop and a quiet room?" "Sure," Ashir said. He didn't say thank you because the favor was a direction of respect rather than money. It felt good to be asked for his brain. He spent an hour testing forms on his phone, sending feedback like a person rearranging furniture so the room actually works. Less text, bigger buttons, a save and come back later for people whose lives don't sit still for 15 minutes. On Saturday evening, as the sky practiced pink, Hannah texted a photo. Her son, asleep with the dinosaur tucked under his chin, and a new box of cereal on the table with the brand name facing the camera like a small, defiant ad. "We're okay," she wrote. "Thank you for being in our story." The text made Ashir's throat sting in the best way. He stood at the kitchen sink and watched his mother wash mint in a bowl like confetti and thought, "I am in more stories than the one I woke up in." Monday morning, the world reached for him with the sort of surprise that does not check whether you have a meeting. A push notification lit his phone at 7:40 a.m. Local teen in checkout controversy receives threat. He blinked, heart tripping. It wasn't him. The article, an irresponsible blog with a URL that wore too many adjectives, misidentified a different kid in a different borough, but the comments below it moved like smoke toward gasoline. Davina texted before he could spiral, "We're on it. Also, don't read comments. Also, there's a car downstairs if you want to ride to school till the weather clears." Ashir looked out the window at the street where minivans learned patience and decided to accept the ride just this once. Courage and prudence are cousins. As the sedan turned the corner toward the school, Ashir saw spray paint on the brick wall near the back entrance. "Hero Scammer" in sloppy capitals that couldn't decide on a font. His stomach slammed. 2 custodians had already dragged out a hose. By the time first period ended, the words were gone, the wall only a shade darker with damp. Still, Ashir felt the outline of the letters under his skin. He sat with the counselor at lunch, not because he was broken, but because people are sturdier when they let someone check the screws. Sometimes when something good happens to you in public, other people's fear gets loud. It doesn't mean you did the wrong thing, it means we will work the plan. The plan included a direct line to Davina and a printed sheet with the school's protocol for inbound nonsense. It did not include asking Ashir to be smaller. By late afternoon, the blog had posted a correction that was almost an apology if you squinted. The comments cooled, the way fires do when starved of oxygen. The spray-painted wall dried to the same color as yesterday. That evening, Marshall and Davina came by the apartment with a laptop that clearly had been assembled by a committee because it had the exact number of ports gods and IT departments disagree about. "For Mina," Marshall said, placing it on the table like an offering at a temple of homework. "No strings, except maybe one. Teach me how to solve the last problem on your worksheet because I got it wrong on the whiteboard." Mina beamed like a little sun and then turned into a professor. Marshall watched Marshall, a man whose name lived on glass, sincerely struggle with a fraction, and something in the world aligned in a way that made sense. Everybody is a beginner somewhere.
When they said goodnight, Marshall paused at the door. "Can I ask you one more thing?" he said to Ashir. "Not a favor, a question." He shifted, searching for the right angle. "Do you want a summer job? Not fetching coffee. Real work. Pay that makes sense. Hours that leave you with a life. You tell us what you're curious about. We'll find a desk that fits." Ashir's first instinct was gratitude. His second was caution. He thought of the old rule, help that changes your shape is not help. "Can I think?" he asked. "I have school and family." "Please think," Marshall said, relieved to find the kid he already liked was as careful as he hoped. "If the answer is no, we'll still be fans." The next week stitched itself into something that looked like routine, wearing better shoes.
HealthTech's program launched quietly but efficiently. The community line placards appeared in 3 more stores. The clinic pharmacy called Ashir's dad to check on side effects because someone, somewhere, had added a line to a protocol. On Thursday, as Ashir and Tavan walked home balancing a bag of naan between them like a sacred relic, the black sedan pulled up and the window lowered. Not Marshall this time. Davina alone, hair down for the first time Ashir had seen, which made her look like off-duty competence. "Need you for something weird. 2 minutes." Ashir glanced at Tavan, who shrugged. "I'll guard the naan," Tavan said, solemn as a priest. Inside the car, Davina handed Ashir her tablet. A paused video filled the screen. Grainy, night, the grocery parking lot. Anonymous drop. From a cashier who doesn't like bullies. Watch. Ashir pressed play. Collins, in a windbreaker that tried and failed not to look like a uniform, met a guy beside the cart corral at midnight. Money changed hands. The fast fold that comes from practice. Boxes, returned groceries, moved from one trunk to another. The man in the hoodie loaded them into a van that wore the name of a cash-only corner store. The timeline clicked in Ashir's head. The restocking fee, the pressure, the shakedown turned small business. Collins wasn't embarrassed by charity. He was protecting revenue streams he'd invented. "PD? Already," Davina said. Also, the chain's compliance team, who just discovered their emails have subject lines like "re-alternative inventory." "I thought you should see the part where your yes tripped a wire we didn't know was there." Ashir watched the loop twice. He felt anger rise, a clean heat, not the kind that burns without light. "Hannah?" "Safe," Davina said. "Our counsel sent a letter to her counsel saying the words we like to hear other people say. We're sorry." He handed back the tablet. "Do you ever get tired?" He meant work. "Every day. And then something small is different, and it's fuel." She smiled. "Go save your bread." Summer arrived with the heavy-handedness of a story that wants to be noticed. Ashir said yes to the job, with caveats he was proud of. 3 days a week, afternoons only, no public anything, and the right to quit if his family needed him. Marshall agreed like a man grateful for boundaries because they make generosity sustainable. On his first day, Ashir sat at a desk near a window that pretended to be a wall. His badge said intern in letters that didn't diminish him. He was paired with a product manager named Kira, who explained roadmaps with the patience of a librarian and the humor of someone who knows slides are not the world. He spent an hour auditing the intake portal with users on a test server, their voices crackling through borrowed phones from laundromats and buses. He said things like, "What did you expect this button to do?" and then wrote, "Make it do that." At 3 p.m., he took a break on a bench outside where the building's shadow cooled the sidewalk. Hannah walked past, surprising them both. She had an interview across the street at a nonprofit that specialized in food security. She put the dinosaur on the shelf. She laughed at herself for announcing it. "I think that means we're okay." "You will be good at telling people what hunger looks like. You have a face that makes the truth feel less like a scolding."
She squeezed his hand, quick and grateful. "You have a face that makes people try their best." In August, on a Wednesday that thought it was a Monday, Ashir got a call from the clinic pharmacist. "Is your father home?" she asked, voice clipped with purpose. "His labs came back. The numbers are weird. Not scary, but we'd like to see him sooner than next month." Ashir's chest went hollow the way houses do when a door slams. "We can come now," he said. "Work could wait. Life doesn't listen to calendars." Kira waved him toward the elevator with a thumbs up and a text to HR that would make the timesheet honest. At the clinic, the waiting room's old magazines had been replaced with an aquarium screensaver. The doctor's voice was calm in the way of people who have learned that calm is a tool. "We're going to adjust his meds," she said. "That's all. Good catch by the system." She nodded toward the new workflow on her screen, a subtle halo around the right field.
We don't usually see this as quickly. Someone flipped a switch. Ashir exhaled a gratitude that had weight. He thought of Marshall's whiteboard, and Davina's quiet radio, and Kira's road maps. He thought of a small river of changes all flowing in the same direction. On the bus home, he watched his father's shoulders lower by quarter inches and wanted to name a star after everyone who had added a line of code to that result. The year turned without fireworks. Rent paid, lights on, pills in a row that looked like a choir still singing. Mina submitted a college application that read like curiosity wearing a backpack. Ashir worked, studied, slept, sometimes even for 8 hours, the wild luxury of it. On a Tuesday in late autumn, a letter arrived with a different weight than the others. HailTech letterhead, but the signature was not Marshall's. It was a spiky, elegant K for Kira. Inside, an offer for a part-time role during the school year with a title that sounded both silly and correct. Youth Advisor, Family Bridge Initiative. Pay that felt like respect. Hours that bent around his life. A paragraph that said, "In every meeting we ask, what would Ashir think? We'd rather ask you in person." He read it twice and then a third time, standing in the kitchen where mint had once been confetti. He looked at his parents. His mother nodded, eyes bright. His father said, "Receipts." It was a blessing and a joke. Ashir accepted quietly. The world didn't ring a bell. It didn't need to. He took the bus to work with a backpack that had learned how to carry possibility without squeaking. He answered questions in rooms where his age made him both visible and useful. He argued for bigger buttons and fewer forms, and the power of a checkbox that said, "I can't finish right now." He came home to a table that fit everyone, and sometimes Hannah, and sometimes Kira, and once, bewilderingly, a city council member who wanted to know how a sign over a customer service desk had changed Thursday nights at their store. Late one evening, a year almost finished, and the air holding its breath for winter, Ashir walked past the grocery where the story had started. The community line placard had been replaced by something sturdier and plainer, a laminated sign with a barcode, a policy number, and a sentence that did not make charity a spectacle. "If you are short up to $40, we will cover it. No questions. Pay it forward when you can." He stood for a minute with his hands in his pockets and let the fluorescent hum do its strange comfort trick. The sliding doors exhaled and inhaled strangers who were less strange than they believed. Across the street, a kid counted coins and a woman put something back, and someone else stepped into the gap without looking around to see if a camera cared. He smiled at the dinosaur aisle on his way out because of course he checked. There it was, a green plush with one eye, the shelf tag slightly crooked. He didn't buy it. He didn't need to. Some stories you carry, some you leave where they can do their quiet work. At home, he set his backpack down and found the envelope from HailTech that had arrived that afternoon. Inside, a simple sheet, the kind that changes a life without doing a dance. Final confirmation. Family Bridge support, 12 months completed. Beneath it, a note in Marshall's hand. "You didn't owe us anything. You still don't. But if you ever need a window to roll down, you know which one."
Ashir sat at the table and traced the word "completed" with a finger that had learned to trust paper again. He thought of all the versions of himself that could have been, tighter, smaller, meaner from holding too much worry for too long. He felt the room widen. He heard Mina in the next room explaining a math problem to herself out loud, the way she always did when the answer was close enough to talk to. He heard his father humming a song his mother liked, off-key and beautiful precisely because of it. There was a knock at the door. 2 short, 1 long. Davina, of course, because schedules have a way of finding endings. She stepped in with cold on her hair and a look on her face that meant she was about to hand him something hard and call it good news. "Walk?" she asked. They went down the stairs and onto the sidewalk where the city had laid out stars and puddles for people who needed to see the sky without looking up. Davina handed him a folded printout, an article. Headline, "Pilot Program Cuts Evictions in 3 Zip Codes by 19% over 6 months." The subhead, "Small dollars, quick timing, big impact." He read, hard adjusting to the new math of being part of a graph. "That's real," he said, eloquent as a knocked breath. Receipts, Davina said, smiling in the shape of his father's favorite word. She put her hands in her pockets against the cold. One more thing. We'd like you to speak at the quiet celebration next week. Not a speech, just a story. Yours or a piece of it. No names you don't want, no cameras where you don't agree. Ashir looked at the reflections at his feet, at the way the city makes halos for ordinary people when it rains just right. He thought of the sliding doors and the manager's microphone, and how accusation sounds loud and proof sounds like air arranging itself around a simple act. He nodded. "Okay," he said, "but I'm wearing my own shoes." Davina laughed into the cold and bumped his shoulder. "Deal." A week later, in a room without stage lights, where applause sounded like people meaning it, Ashir told a story about a coin roll and a receipt and a dinosaur with one good eye. He didn't tell it like a hero. He told it like a person who had been a bridge for 10 seconds and then learned that bridges could be built to stay. When he finished, nobody asked for a selfie. Someone asked where to hang the next laminated sign. That night, he returned home through the ordinary grace of public transit and found his mother asleep in a chair, a book open like a tent, the apartment warm with cumin and cinnamon. He sat at the table, took out a sheet of paper, and wrote 3 names on the top: Marshall, Davina, Hannah. Under them he wrote, "People who made the world behave." He added one more name, smaller, because humility is a habit now: Ashir. Not because he needed to see it, but because sometimes the ledger needs to show that you were there when your life turned. He put the paper in the drawer with the warranties and the spare batteries and the recipes that never fail. He turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway, letting the dark acknowledge him like an old friend who had learned to share. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.